The African nation of Niger announced that it was pulling its ambassador out of nearby Côte d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, citing threatening remarks made by that country's president, Alassane Ouattara, who advocated armed action to return Niger's pre-coup leadership. Last week, Ouattara called the July 26th coup in Niger and the former president's detention acts of terrorism, and he said that his country would join Nigeria and Benin in providing troops for a mission fronted by the 15-nation Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS. Ouattara made the remark last week following an ECOWAS summit in Nigeria. At that summit, the bloc's leaders announced that they would convene a standby force for possible intervention. Ouattara told reporters that a military operation to restore the constitutional order should begin as soon as possible, and indicated his country's readiness to contribute between 850 and 1,100 troops to an ECOWAS mission. Meanwhile, the French government also expressed support for the use of force by ECOWAS for that purpose, and also offered to join in the military effort. For more on all this, we spoke with Moscow-based analyst Mark Sleboda via Skype on Tuesday. Mark, it's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Don, thanks for having me.
Well, there's a new game afoot in Africa, apparently. There's another sort of push against neo-colonialism spots, and Niger is one fracture point. We get seeing ECOWAS, which is the Organization of Western African States, mostly a colonial, like an AOS type organization, threatening to restore the constitutional order, as they put it. Ouattara from Côte d'Ivoire apparently forgot that he's the product of exactly this kind of a coup, only with the French bringing him in at gunpoint in the face of a ruling from the Constitutional Court that said that Laurent Gbagbo had won the election, and now it's 12 years ago. And people are starting to choose up sides. France and the U.S. have a little spat going on, too. Maybe you could help us look at all of this.
Sure. It seems that has been a new great game, a geopolitical game going on in Africa for about a decade now between primarily the U.S. and its European client states and China, where China has been building infrastructure and investing in Africa, and the U.S. Has been building military bases, and it has its AFRICOM, its global military command for hegemony in Africa, under the guise of establishing security relationships to fight terrorists. Very similar to a lot of what it's done in the Middle East. But it seems that lately, Russia has been getting back into Africa, largely through business relationships. A lot of African countries have been turning to Africa for help with know-how, expertise for resource extraction, oil, gas.
Turning to Russia.
Yeah. But also increasingly for security matters, particularly with the Russian, now Belarusian security contractor Wagner, which business is still going strong in Africa. And a lot of African countries, particularly in West Africa, who feel that they have been exploited in a resurgent neo-colonial French colonialism in West Africa, have been turning very hard towards Russia. There's a phenomenon in protests across Africa, but particularly West Africa. The protesters against established governments that are, shall we say, French loyalists, have been flying the Russian flag. And it's not a part of some type of resurgent communism or anything like that. It's not ideological. I think it's mostly just Africans see Russia in the world as resisting the countries, the Western countries that they resent, both past and present, for colonialism. And they see Russia resisting in a way that they often lack the power to do. And that is very inspiring for them. And we've seen a number of West African states have their government, their pro-West, their pro-French, pro-Western governments toppled, particularly Mali and Burkina Faso. And both of those states have kicked the French military forces out as a security partner, quote unquote, and brought Wagner in. And this has the U.S. all upset that Russia is interjecting itself in what they see as rightful, U.S. hegemony territory. And Niger is the latest country where it has become a big flashpoint. The corrupt pro-French president of Niger. He's actually the first democratically elected president of Niger since their independence, but there's a lot of questions about the way that the elections were arranged. He's deeply unpopular, and he was just Bazoum. He was just overthrown in a homegrown military junta with, everyone seems to admit, apparently no overt external influence.
And lots of popular support, too.
Lots of popular support. 73%, according to Western polls, on the streets. So obviously this president was incredibly unpopular, and he was overthrown by the head of his own presidential guard, General Tchani. And this is because the fear that he could join with Mali and Burkina Faso, kick the French and American military bases out of his country. There's a French military base with some 1,500 troops and an American military base with 1,001 troops, interestingly enough, and several drone bases there. The new government wants them out, and they are threatening to use their compliant states in West Africa to intervene. And this the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. The most important player is the big population and economic and military heavyweight in the region, Nigeria, which has a very pro-French president, backed also by the Ivory Coast, which, as you rightly pointed out, is basically in power due to a French military coup in the country. So the U.S. basically it's been threatening that ECOWAS would go in to quote unquote restore the constitutional order. Mali and Burkina Faso and Guinea have all said that this is unacceptable to them. They would regard it as an attack on them, some type of intervention, and that they would pull out of ECOWAS. Meanwhile, Algeria has also weighed in, saying that they would also find some intervention unacceptable. And as they were saying that, the Algerian defense minister was visiting with Shoigu in Russia. So there's all kinds of geopolitics afoot there. And the U.S. sent their 800-pound ogre, the leg breaker, Victoria Nuland, to quote unquote negotiate. And she didn't even get to see the new leader in Niger. There was a great headline that regime change Karen asks to see the manager in Niger.
Yep. Yep.
But there's the question that she may have been throwing France under the bus in a deal to not allow an ECOWAS intervention or not push for one if Niger, the new government, allows the U.S. to keep their military base and doesn't bring in Wagner, but apparently throwing France under the bus.
Right. You know, it's interesting, too, that there's a thread that ties all these former French colonies, and it's kind of even perhaps not exactly accurate to call them former, which is and this was the thing that got former President Laurent Gbagbo dragged out by the French military at gunpoint back in December 2010. He had said, gee, all of us former French colonies are still required to allow Paris to print our currency, and we have to keep half of our reserves in the National Bank in France. And yet we have no control over our own currencies. They print francs for us, and they don't even use francs themselves anymore. They use the euro. And that level, the depth of control of the economies of all of these countries, I wouldn't even say it's a legacy of colonialism. It's an aspect of colonialism that continues. And so that's part of the fuel driving this too. Mark, we're out of time, so I'd like to thank you for your time, and we'll speak with you again next week.
Thanks for having me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.